Welcome. I'm Angela Seifer. I'm the Executive Director of the National Digital Inclusion Alliance. This is our 8th in a series of 9 webinars. Yes, it has in fact been exhausting. And yes, I'm ready for Wednesdays to not be full of webinars anymore. We're very excited about today. Today is a little unusual in our webinar format, and that we're going to start out with some awards for some very well-deserving folks. And then we're going to have a couple words from a very unique sponsor that NDIA has. And then we're going to get into our question about federal policy and the big question everyone's talking about, where's the money? So we can do this work. So NDIA is a nonprofit. We support digital inclusion practitioners on the ground by helping them talk to each other. We do events like this, and then we also learn from what's happening on the ground in order to influence public policy and general advocacy around the issue of digital equity. So I'm very excited about today. We're going to get started in just a sec. I need to give you all some logistical kinds of notes, which is in the chat. We love the chat, talk to each other, right? Like, we really like to be in person because we are a community. That can't happen today. So use the chat, right? Get to know each other. Questions that you have for the panelists, please put those in the Q&A so that the panelists make sure we don't lose them. Sometimes when there's a lot of chatter in the chat, we miss some questions, and we don't want to miss any questions. You're already on mute. You can't talk. So don't worry about that. But do make sure that you use the chat to interact with the rest of the panelists. Okay, I'm going to turn it over to Adrienne, and we're going to get started with our first piece of this, which is our awards. And we are so honored and pleased to have Benton as a partner on this. So it's perfect that Adrienne lead this section. Adrienne, I turn it over to you.
Thank you, Angela, and thank you to you and your expanding team, who I won't all mention, but you all know, and who've just been incredible force over the last year, and a continuing partner of Benton's in presenting these awards. A sign in front of a church not far from my home has, for the past many months, read, "We'll get through this together by staying apart." As spring is here and we awaken from more than a year of social distancing, we gather today to celebrate the people who helped their communities come together. Named for Charles Benton, the founding father of the Benton Institute for Broadband and Society, the Digital Equity Awards I present today recognize leadership and dedication in advancing the ability of all of us to fully participate in our increasingly digital society by ensuring everyone has the access and skills they need to make use of the internet. Our months combating COVID-19 have only spotlighted this reality. Before I present the champions, I want to thank the selection committee and recognize the work they put into reviewing the outstanding pool of candidates. Digital equity work is valuable and impactful, but challenging to compare. My colleague, Robbie Macbeth, who chaired the committee, informed me that his colleagues engaged in very deep, thoughtful discussions, a testament to the inspiring digital equity work happening all across the country. So my thanks to the committee. First off, I'd like to present to Monica Babine the 2021 Digital Equity Champion Award, which recognizes an outstanding individual who's made a difference in the field of digital equity. Monica has worked for Washington State University Extension's Division of Governmental Studies and Services as Senior Associate of the Program for Digital Initiatives. And boy, is that a mouthful, Monica. While she was there, she created the Broadband Action Team model and served as a valuable resource for local leaders interested in broadband planning. These teams are growing across Washington State, engaging people to identify local digital divides and make plans to bridge them. Recently, the state of Washington highlighted Monica's model as a best practice, and Governor Jay Inslee included funding in his biannual budget to develop a formal statewide program. Monica focuses on rural communities, working tirelessly to bring together citizens that need service with policymakers at the local, state, and federal levels to make ubiquitous broadband access a reality. Monica organized several rural broadband summits in 2019 with the state of Washington and the U.S. Department of Agriculture after passage of legislation establishing Washington's Broadband Office and Infrastructure Program. And Monica was instrumental in providing input into Senator Patty Murray's staff as they drafted the Digital Equity Act of 2019. Monica's knowledge of broadband communities, policies, and programs is broad and deep, said the NTIA's Karen Perry. But what is more impressive is how Monica can energize others to take action to improve broadband in their communities. And today, we're also honoring Jeff Milner with the Charles Benton Emerging Leader Award, which acknowledges up-and-coming digital inclusion practitioners. Jeff is the Senior Program and Operations Officer at the Enterprise Center in Chattanooga, Tennessee, which has a growing reputation as one of the best wired cities in the country. But Jeff realizes that Chattanooga can't reach its full potential unless it is a digitally equitable city. During the COVID-19 emergency, Jeff collaborated with the University of Tennessee at Chattanooga, Hamilton County Schools, and the municipal broadband provider, the Electric Power Board, to map out areas with the highest needs and then implement 125 new Wi-Fi access points. He's been a driving force in Hamilton County Schools EdConnect, which brought no-cost, high-speed internet to 13,000 students' homes. Jeff has also pushed for the use of data to understand the impact of EdConnect. He is part of a small group collaborating with a research team from Boston College to collect baseline data and monitor how the program impacts education, health, and other aspects of life. And he helped to raise more than $8 million to support local digital equity efforts in the last year. Jeff himself may have captured his work best by saying, when the discounted fall behind the curve in an increasingly online world, they can find themselves alienated from the resources right outside their front door. Supporting residents through relationships, networking, and agency to engage on their own terms, the fundamental work of digital inclusion is one way forward in a world increasingly dictated by both geography and connectivity. Monica and Jeff, I'm honored to present these awards to you both today. Thank you for your efforts to ensure that we all will be connected, be we apart or together. And now I'd like to call on Monica to say a few words, and after her, we'll hear from Jeff. Monica?
Wow. Thank you. I am so humbled and honored to receive this award. I've had the pleasure for many years to work with so many dedicated and smart people to help increase broadband awareness, access, and use every day. If I could list all of them, we'd be here for the rest of the day. But know that I so appreciate everyone, from community and tribal members and leaders to those supporting the work at the state, regional, and national levels. I have learned so much from each of you. When I share with folks my plans to retire at the end of June, I'm often asked, why now? After all these years, it seems like we have finally received the recognition about the importance of this work. Funding is in the pipeline and great efforts are already underway. And I believe all that is true. And I have never been more hopeful in the decades I've been doing this about what lies ahead. And that hope comes from knowing that there are so many bright, passionate, committed digital equity champions doing this work in communities across our country. Again, my thanks to NDIA and to all of you for all you do. I wish each of you the very, very best. And how fitting that I get to pass this on to our emerging leader, Jeff. Thank you.
Monica, thank you. And that in itself is humbling. I'm holding this right now, and even holding it, it still comes as a surprise to hear my name. That may be from being raised as a Red Sox fan and just assuming something will go wrong at the very last minute. But I am deeply honored and deeply humbled to have been nominated and recognized by my peers, my betters, the folks who are part of this committee and this community. I following in the footsteps, following behind Monica, Deb, Sosha, my mentor, Mooney Ray and Rebecca, who have received this in the past couple of years, is a deep honor, the greatest of my career. There is something very strange about being recognized individually for something that is inherently collaborative and collective work. I believe that in Chattanooga alone, the folks that I am privileged to work with every day on our team at the Enterprise Center, Sammy, Mary, Casey, our partners at Hamilton County, like Rachel and Michelle and Becca, or at EPB, like Evan, or at the city of Chattanooga, like Jermaine, or any of the other organizations that we work with, La Paz, Signal Centers, so on, that I'm truly privileged and to be singled out on this. There are so many other wonderful choices, particularly this year, that has been so marked by loss. But I think too, as Monica said, by hope and resolve not to go back to the way things were before we experienced this for our communities. And particularly in Chattanooga, as we think about the future of smart cities working hand in hand with digital equity always. I will close by saying that I remember begging and you know me, arguing to go to my first NDI conference, what feels like a decade ago, but is just a couple of very long years ago, and the opportunity to be around, as again, Monica said, this community of digital equity champions, of feeling not alone in this work, of being part of a community where the individual goes by the wayside, where we are collaborative, and where our ultimate goal involves us all working together on this. It is truly a privilege. I look so forward to working with all of you in the months and years to come, and especially to be in person together with this community again soon. So thank you very much.
Thanks to you both again. We're obviously just honored to honor you. And Angela, I think I'm turning it back to you. Thanks so much again.
Well, that was awesome. In the NDIA staff chat, we all started to get like a little emotional, right? During this moment in time when we're all separated from each other, to be able to have these moments when we can connect again is pretty amazing. Okay, so next I have a special treat. Dennis Devine from Alliant Credit Union is going to talk to us. Dennis is Alliant, I should say, is a new partner with NDIA, and we are thrilled to have them. So let's just start real quick. Dennis, you want to give a quick hello and who Alliant is?
Angela, thanks for having me. And let me just offer a personal congratulations to Monica and Jeff. What inspiring stories and remarkable work. Alliant's been part of a part of the series throughout the course of the year, and it's stories like that that make it powerful every single week. For those of you that aren't super familiar with Alliant, we are a national digital credit union. So we serve members across the country, in a digital way. We have no branches. We're one of the 10 largest credit unions in the country. But what we're particularly proud of is the value that we offer to our members. We're not a bank. We're a credit union. So that means we don't have shareholders. We focus on our members every day. We're a not-for-profit owned by our members. And as a digital institution, we have a really focused effort on bringing digital experiences and a lean cost structure. So best rates in the market, incredibly low fees, great loans. If you Google Align Credit Union, you'll learn a little bit about us. But our partnership with the National Digital Inclusion Alliance is a newer one. And Angela, we're just thrilled to be working with you all.
So Dennis, let's talk to the folks about why, right? Why digital inclusion? Why NDIA? Why is Alliant jumping into this work?
We have a passionate group of folks. I'm lucky to be the representative of about 700 colleagues today who really care deeply about this work. As a national digital financial institution, we know that technology and internet access is not a luxury. It's essential to the foundation of our society. And as an institution, we have a unique opportunity to do something about it, to close the digital divide that exists. And we honestly believe that without active efforts and supporting the incredible work of the folks that are participating in this conference, gaps continue to widen, income gaps, racial gaps, community gaps. And so it's personal to us. I think we can all tell stories of experiences we've had, people in a pandemic that we care for, and we want to be a part of the solution. And so as we have a mission around the social impact and social responsibility of our organization, our team decided this is where we wanted to work. And NDIA, you spend a little bit of time networking into the world. Angela, you and your team quickly become premier, and you and the team were great enough to engage and help find ways that we could be part of, hopefully part of the solutions to come.
It has been really fabulous for NDIA to our staff to interact with your staff. We have a unique partnership that I think is, it is unique. The fact that you all don't just write us a check, but we have conversations, you provide advice and guidance, you run a very large nonprofit, we run a very small nonprofit. And so having that guidance from you has been really essential to multiple members of our team and NDIA in general. Dennis,
it's a two-way street, Angela. Part of the reason we're so interested is because we're learning from you and from Gina and from Caitlin and so many on your team that we get a chance to work with on a regular basis. We think we have some unique opportunities to bring to this, to this problem that exists in our society. But we also know we can't do it alone. And so working with partners is core. It was one of the reasons we were so interested in being part of this very series, this conference, is because getting to know new partners in the industry is something that we're awfully interested in. I will say parenthetically that we have a foundation that's attached to the Alliant Credit Union, the Alliant Credit Union Foundation. Google that and you'll find it quickly, but it's organized around digital equity and what role can we play in supporting organizations across the country on this mission. So we're blessed for our partnership with you, and for us it's a great start to see what we can do to help.
One of the reasons we started NDIA was because there wasn't financial resources for the work that's happening on the ground, right? That was the reason. Their voice wasn't heard in DC, and folks didn't have what they needed to really have the impact that they wanted to have. One of the industries that we've often thought about and we've tried, and some of our partners have worked with, is the financial industry. So what do you think the financial industry can do to create a more digitally equitable world out there? How do you guide them?
Well, first of all, holy cow, what an impact you and every colleague of yours in this movement has, you have the attention, and it's been amazing to see, whether it be stimulus acts or infrastructure or state or local activities, to really hear the messages that you have shaped. But for financial services going forward, we think we can play an important role. Banking is no longer physical, it's digital. If it wasn't true before the pandemic, and it was, it's definitely true now. If you think about how everyone spends their time, more than 3,000 bank branches closed across the country in 2020. I expect that there will be more than that closing in 2021. And in some cases, that impacts the most dire needs of communities. And so financial institutions can play an active role in ensuring not just that there's financial literacy, because that is awfully important and something that we care about, but there is digital access, technology access, digital literacy to help make that. And so advocating along with you, we talk to other trade associations and regulators who have interests in this that might be outside the scope of the traditional digital equity efforts, supporting with resources partners that are interested in doing this work, and doing everything we can to be part of the team. I think there are big roles that we can play, and we hope with partners we can do that.
And we are super excited about the potential there. I'm gonna ask you one last question, Dennis. What's something you've learned from this webinar series?
Just how cool and diverse the members of this community are. There's passion that comes across, but the entrepreneurial and creative behavior that is now scaling across, you can see it occurring in neighborhoods, and then you can see it occurring on a national basis, and it's shaping, hundreds of billions of dollars of federal spending at this point. And that passion is a big deal. I would also say that the spark that's occurred among our organization at Alliant around this, hearing from you and your team and this community, has really moved us, just as Monica and Jeff's stories did. And so we look forward to continuing our work together.
Awesome. Thank you, Dennis. Thank you for all that you're doing with us. And now I'm going to move it over to Amy Huffman. So just a couple of days ago, I was like, hey, we have a policy director now. Why am I supposed to be moderating this policy discussion? That's ridiculous. Hey, Amy, would you moderate this session? And she's such a good sport that she was like, sure, why not? So I'm going to ask all of our panelists to come join us on screen so she can introduce everyone, and I'm handing it over to Amy.
Hello, friends. Thanks, Angela. And I just have to say congratulations to Jeff and Monica. Your work has been incredibly inspiring to me, and I'm sure to the fellow panelists here too. So again, congratulations. Hello, happy Wednesday, and welcome to our federal funding and policy panel. I am thrilled to be here today. Angela's correct, good sport, yes, but this is exciting stuff. I'm so excited to be here with y'all. So because we are at a pivotal moment in the digital equity and inclusion space, right? Many of us have worked in this field for years, decades even, with very little like scrap change to do this work. Policy around this issue has been slow coming, and yet now we are at a moment in time where the spotlight's on our industry, the spotlight's on this work, and there is a real chance to make real change. And today we get to talk about what's going on at the federal level. And it's exciting to me because the funding matters, but the policy matters too, right? So we need to get this right now so that generations to come don't have to come back and fix this later. So I'm really excited to dig into some of the policies that have already passed, some of them that are in the process of being talked about right now, and with an all-star panel who I'm excited to introduce. They've all been incredibly generous with their time and sharing their wisdom with me as I've come into this role. And so I'm really excited for you to get to hear from them. Really quickly, throughout this panel, we will try to avoid acronyms. And if we start to use them, our team will keep us honest and put those things in the chat. Before I introduce my panelists, I am going to quickly just run through a couple of the things we'll be talking through today. So that those to level set a little bit. So first up, we've got the emergency broadband benefit, which I'm sure most of you are aware of by this point, and we do call that EBB. It's a $3.2 billion fund, and it goes to affordability. We have the emergency connectivity fund, which is a $7.1 billion fund, also working on addressing affordability for low-income households. That will go directly through schools and libraries. Then we have the American Rescue Plan Act, which is funding for state and local governments to do all sorts of things, but in those funds, digital inclusion is an eligible expense, and that's $350 billion. And then we have the infrastructure bill. And this is the one that's a little bit nebulous at this point, but I'm excited to talk about. And that's somewhere anywhere between 65 billion and 100 billion. hopefully, if it passes, right? So we will be talking and digging into those things today. Again, try to put your questions in the Q&A function. The chat gets a little long, but let's dig in. So I'm going to introduce the panelists with their title and organization, and then I'm going to ask them to share a couple things about themselves and their organization and what they're working right now in terms of digital equity. So first up, we have Francella Ochilo. She's the Executive Director of Next Century Cities. Next, we have Joseph Getachew. He's the Director of Media and Democracy Program at Common Cause. Then we have Jenna Leventoff, the Senior Policy Counsel for Public Knowledge, and Olivia Wine, the Staff Attorney for the National Consumer Law Center. So Francella, would you give us a couple things you're working on at Next Century Cities as it relates to digital equity?
Yes, and I want to say congratulations on a successful conference. I'm glad to be at the tail end and the anchor of this train. And also congratulations to the award recipients today. My name is Francella Ochilo. I am Executive Director of Next Century Cities. We work on essentially supporting local officials across the country in 40 states, all the way from Maine to Hawaii. And we focus specifically on making sure that local officials have a voice in broadband policymaking at every level of government, local, county, state, and also federal level. And we also work on making sure that community level insights are actually documented on the record when people are crafting federal policy. One of the things that we know is that for years, federal and state policy is focused exclusively on broadband deployment. Sometimes even though adoption tends to be an afterthought, funding has actually exclusively funded access solutions. So we were excited to see things like the emergency broadband benefit, which actually speaks to the affordability issue. But we are always concerned about making sure that officials at every level of government think that we need to be thinking about access and adoption issues, which is why NDIA's work is so important. So really excited to be a part of this conversation and always excited to be an ally.
Thank you, Francella. Joseph?
Thanks, and thanks to Angela, Amy, Sean, and the NDIA team for inviting me to be on this panel. I'm Joseph Getachew. I'm the Media and Democracy Director at Common Cause. For those who don't know Common Cause, we are a 50-year-old organization focused on democracy reform issues. We work on issues like voting rights, money in politics, ethics, all with the lens of holding power accountable and infusing our values with democracy in our public policy space. Specifically on media and democracy, we work on promoting open and affordable communications networks and making sure there are independent and diverse voices in our media. Really, it comes down to what are the critical technologies we need for a functioning democracy? And broadband is a critical component of that. What we've seen during the pandemic and even before that is that broadband is a functional part of a 21st century democracy. It facilitates civic engagement, responsive government, and access to government resources. And those who don't have broadband are really falling behind in being participants in our democracy. So similar to Francella, we were thrilled to see the emergency broadband benefit not only pass Congress, but finally get launched by the FCC a couple of weeks ago. We spent a lot of time in helping craft the rules around that program. And now we're transitioning to spreading the word and conducting outreach initiatives around the program because it's only as successful as many people we reach to enroll. In addition to that, we're working on what long-term policy solutions look like when we're talking about broadband access, affordability, and digital inclusion initiatives. I know we're going to be talking a bit about that a little bit later, so really happy to be here.
Thank you, Joseph. We're happy you're here too. Next up, we have Jenna.
Yeah, thanks, Amy. Like everyone else, I'm super happy to be here and congratulations to the award winners. That's really exciting. So I am Jenna Leventoff. I'm a senior policy counsel at Public Knowledge. I always like to say that Public Knowledge sort of works at the intersection of consumer rights and technology. And we really work on all sorts of aspects of tech policy, including broadband and free speech online, copyright, all of that sort of stuff. So a big part of that work is just making sure that everyone has access to affordable, reliable internet. And we focus primarily on doing a lot of that advocacy work on Capitol Hill. So in the past, year and a half. Has it been a year and a half since the pandemic? Since the pandemic started, we've really put a lot of focus on working with members of Congress to make sure that we pass this emergency broadband benefit and get a long-term subsidy, that we have programs to help get people devices. And where we can, we try to promote digital literacy programs as well. My background is actually in higher ed and workforce, so I'm always glad to be able to uplift that.
Thank you, Jenna. And last but not least, Olivia.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for inviting me. Thank you to everybody at NDIA for the excellent work that you're doing. It's absolutely critical right now, and we are all working to get funding for this because that's needed. I'm Olivia Wine, a staff attorney at the National Consumer Law Center. NCLC is a 50-year-old organization as well. We started out as a legal services support center, focusing on using consumer laws to protect low-income consumer interests. And I'm part of a utility team, and we view broadband as essential as water and energy, and I work on all of the above. I also need to disclose that I am on the board of the Universal Service Administrative Company, acronym USAC. If you hear USAC, that's what I'm talking about. I'm not authorized to speak on behalf of the board or USAC, and I am here solely as a staff attorney at NCLC. Thanks.
Thank you, Olivia. Okay, so we're going to dive right in. And first up, because this is top of mind for many of our affiliates, is the Emergency Broadband Benefit Program. So Olivia, we're a little over 2 weeks into the implementation of the long-awaited Emergency Broadband Benefit Program, or EBB. As one of the leading experts on the Lifeline and EBB programs, can you give us a brief overview of the EBB program, how it came to be, and then more importantly, what we know about how its implementation is going so far?
Sure. In a nutshell, as this pandemic led to the shutdowns in the states back in March, we knew in this space that broadband was going to become even more essential. Just the nature of this pandemic limited the workaround options that people were relying on to access broadband. Schools were shut down, cafes were shut down. So folks without home broadband were at a further disadvantage. Yet we knew schools were being shut down and kids needed to go online. So it is all of what we have experienced and are still experiencing in many of our communities. We started early organizing organically, writing letters to the FCC, writing letters to Congress saying, we need to either, expand the existing universal service programs to meet the need, which you have the authority to do, or Congress, in your COVID relief bills, put in funding for low-income broadband affordability programs. So we kept at it. We did our best, all of us on this call we were part of webinars and campaigns to get the word out, to really sort of put pressure on those two avenues to see where we could get the relief first. To give some perspective, the Emergency Broadband Benefit Program was funded in the December COVID Relief Act, as well as other forms of COVID relief. The FCC has done something amazing in getting this program stood up so quickly. So I understand that, there's been a high demand, a whole, to the point where the simultaneous folks entering into the USAC systems to find out more information, to try and get a customer rep. I mean, it's been like clogging sort of the avenues in. Help is on the way. That's moving forward. Response time should be faster because those systems have been supplemented. So that is a good thing. The important thing in this environment is actually the feedback loop. 2 weeks in, week one, we had 1 million people enroll into this program, which is phenomenal for an emergency federal program. Again, sort of, as frustrating as some of the stories from the field are, the good news story is this is showing Congress and the policymakers the high demand for a broadband affordability program. This is our opportunity here to sort of lift up that message, show that, you know, there is this mechanism that we can improve as we move forward. So in the infrastructure bill, one of the things we'll be talking about is what is in play is finding some additional funds to put into the emergency broadband benefit program to extend the length of that benefit while we work on what a permanent broadband affordability program will look like, which the panel will be discussing in the future. So that's sort of where we are in the state of play. So please stay tuned, especially those of you working with customers that are calling the toll-free numbers. Those response times should be getting better very, very soon. Just encourage folks to not give up. And again, there are organically feedback loops with Universal Service Administrative Company and the FCC. One of the ways to sort of know about what conversations are happening right now would be the Lifeline Coalition Listserv. Many of you probably are on it, but those of you that aren't, if you're interested, please, you know, put your name in the chat or the Q&A so that we can capture it and get you connected. This is where you'll find out about when those conversations are happening, how to plug in. We're trying to set up a feedback loop directly with the FCC to capture the stories in the Consumer and Governmental Affairs Bureau to increase response times. But this iterative process of hearing from the field, hearing what improvements are in play, will improve this program design and implementation as we move forward as well. Thanks so much.
Perfect. Thank you, Olivia. That was a great overview. And, you know, 1 million people in a week isn't anything to sneeze at, right? We've got a lot of room to grow and a lot of people to add to the program, but 1 million in a week is something to cheers to. So that said, even before the EBB launched, discussions about what a long-term permanent benefit could and should look like had already started. So I'm going to give each of you now a chance to talk about, from your perspective, what should a permanent benefit look like?
I'm not sure if Joseph wanted to go first, but
yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so I'll just go ahead and say that I think when we're thinking about what does a long-term benefit look like, I think there's still a lot of thinking and brainstorming that needs to happen, because what I always come back to is I think we are still, even in light of COVID, in fact, even though a lot of hearts and minds have changed about access and who has it, who doesn't, I think we are still grappling with the fundamental question: does every single resident in the United States deserve access to a digital society? If we are not able to answer that with an unequivocal yes, we aren't going to be able to come up with ways that we talk about, well, how do we solve the competition and the access problem? How do we ask questions about the adoption piece? What do we do about making sure that we have the community partnerships in place to not only meet the current needs for adoption, but the ongoing benchmarks for digital literacy, device distribution, who's going to help with tech support? What can everyone do? Because I think in general, I think that there's room for every single stakeholder in this universe to have some sort of ownership of the solution. Because quite frankly, we're going to need more providers, because even as wonderful as the emergency broadband benefit is, it is not in every single community. I remember when I was talking to some people that represented indigenous communities in Hawaii, and they didn't even have a provider nearby. And so the thing is, they're Americans too, and they deserve access. So if we can't answer that question about the fact that every single resident in communities far and near, communities that are in the North and the South and the Midwest, if we can't find a way to make sure that everyone has a provider nearby, and then make sure that they can afford the access to get it from being amazing digital infrastructure outside of their front door to being able to cross the threshold of their home, and then think about what are the digital literacy and adoption partnerships that we need to put in place. All of those are prerequisites for us to actually develop an effective long-term solution. So while I'm hopeful that we're going to be able to have a constructive conversation, and I also think that it's important that we were able to stand up at least a temporary program during COVID, I think there's a lot of thinking to do in what's next.
Yeah, I'll jump in here. I agree with a lot of what Francella said. I think when we're talking about a long-term program, it's not just affordability, and it goes to the three legs of the stool, as NDIA affiliates like to say, and looking at access, affordability, and digital inclusion or digital equity activities. I think it's important to realize when we're thinking about a long-term benefit that the pandemic really changed not just the narrative, but the connectivity needs in general. And we're not going back. We're not going back to a world where we're not going to be online in pretty much every type of capacity or service or business we're in. That means we're likely to see students have some sort of hybrid virtual and in-person experience. Telework is going to be a lot more significant than it was last year or the year before. Telemedicine is going to be huge. It's already huge, but it's just going to grow. And all types of online services will just function a lot more, will be more utilized now than they were just a year ago. So what does that mean for low-income households specifically? It means their connectivity needs are going to change. It means that existing programs that we have now, particularly Lifeline, aren't necessarily going to be adequate moving forward if they're not reformed or changed to meet those needs. So we're looking at quality of service, for example. A lot of times low-income products are offered for a certain low rate and are offered at a certain speed and tier of service. That just isn't enough. If we're looking at a product that's only a 10.1 or something lower, or even 25.3, that's just not going to be enough to meet a lot of the needs when we're talking about online schooling, teleworking, and things of that nature. So when we're figuring out what a long-term benefit looks like, we need to make sure that we're providing robust quality products to low-income households. That means high-speed, reliable connectivity, and making sure that providers who are in a future program are providing the services. EBV, or the Emergency Broadband Benefit Program, is extremely important right now, but we're seeing a variety of services being offered. Some are high tier, some not as high tier. I would like to see a long-term broadband benefit program offer high tier services. We need to make sure that, as Francella mentioned, that this is reaching everyone, not just places where existing providers are offering low-income services or are going to be enrolling, but places where are a lot harder to reach. That means targeting marginalized communities who don't necessarily speak English as their first language, immigrant communities, the disability community. These are all communities that don't necessarily get thought of first when it comes to these types of benefits, but are crucial in terms of making sure they're connected. There's a lot of other areas that we can get into, but I'll stop there and let others answer.
I'll just, in addition to the attributes Francella and Joseph mentioned in this ecosystem, strong consumer protections will be critical. Stable funding will be absolutely essential.
And I'll just add on a little bit. I mean, I think one of the great things that we saw with the emergency broadband benefit is that it was a $50 subsidy, and that's really the highest subsidy that we've had for broadband. And so we think it's really important that any subsidy that's available allows consumers to get service for free, and that subsidy, changes over time as the cost of broadband changes. Whether the cost goes up or down, we want to make sure that consumers are covered. And so we think it'll be really helpful to have a long-term subsidy amount that's changed based on, the cost of data. And hopefully that's something that we can empower the FCC to collect, and something which there are bills talking about that I think we'll get into later in the webinar. But that's really important for us, is, making sure that there's that no cost option available. And I think it's also important that we make sure that consumers have not only an internet subsidy, but a phone subsidy, because I think the reality is that most consumers use both services and need both services. And so we want to make sure that both can be covered if there's communities in needs. And then, I just echo what everyone else said. I think it's really important that we have sustainable and predictable funding. We don't want funding to be sort of taken away when there's a change in congressional leadership. We don't want people guessing how much money is in the fund, so that, we can't give people a guarantee about how long the subsidy will last for. And I also agree with everyone that we do want some guardrails around the program.
If I could just add a little bit to what Jenna was saying about the importance of voice, and I like to raise it in the context of parity, because non-low-income households are not forced to choose between, a robust home broadband and mobile broadband. They're connected pretty much wherever they go if you're not low income. And if you think about in terms of public safety, the reliance on local governments for using the cell phone to push out alerts, like critical alerts, and that the vast majority of 911 calls these days are made through a mobile phone. So we need to not make low-income households have to choose between those critical functions.
Absolutely. Thank you. And I'm glad that all of you are working towards a permanent broadband benefit. It's wonderful to have such thoughtful people working on this behind the scenes and in front of the scenes. So moving on, the U.S. Treasury Department recently released guidelines for state and local governments for eligible uses for spending the $350 billion fund provided to them through the American Rescue Plan Act, or ARPA. As we read it, digital inclusion activities are an eligible expense, but so are many other things. How would you advise our affiliates to work with local and state leaders to encourage them to invest the funds in digital inclusion work? Francella, I'd love if you could chime into this question, since you work with so many state and local officials.
Well, one of the things that we always want to remind local officials is that you don't want to assume that state and federal officials know your community story. That's one of the things that sometimes is right in front of us, that it doesn't require a lot of resources for you to be able to actually distill the impact in your community. What exactly is the need? And that's not a formal broadband data assessment. That does not require sometimes a city council vote or the mayor's support. Sometimes it means giving oxygen to what exactly do you need in your community. One of the things in the Treasury notice, it's I don't want to get lost in the minutia of a public notice. And if you want to, geek out on the details and argue policy, I always encourage people, file comments, say, yes, high five, I think the government agency did a great job, or you left a little bit of room to clarify what exactly would this apply to, because I do think there's a little bit of wiggle room as to whether or not this is going to apply to all broadband access and adoption projects. And also communities that are risk averse will lean on the side of a very strict construction of rules. And so they may not apply funds to a broadband project if they feel like it may retroactively be deemed as ineligible. So setting aside the legalese, when we actually just talk about what does your community need, I think the first thing that you need to do is think about what are you doing to elevate your community story? Have you shared that story with elected officials? Have you circulated that story, whether it's things that are free and in front of you, whether it's radio, news, op-eds in or newsletters, things that are right in front of people where you can say, this is what I need in my community. Another thing that we miss opportunities to do is to actually use our elected officials as your actual storyteller. Tell them the statistic, the data point, the story, the person you want them to remember, so that they can take that with them in other forums. And those are the rooms that you can't get into. And I think most importantly, it's important to make sure that you guys have relationships with your state broadband officers. I think that that's sometimes that people just assume that municipalities and local officials have conversations with them. I actually remember I was on a panel with over 100 city and municipal leaders, and it was only a few people that raised their hands that could actually say that they knew who their state broadband officer was. And the problem is the people who are first in line to that state broadband office or to that governor's office who's going to be distributing the funds are going to be the first in line to get resources. So it's really important that even if you aren't ready to make an ask, that you actually elevate your own community story, say exactly what it is that you need, use the people in your network as the storyteller, and then make your ask to make sure that you're in line for funding.
That's great advice. Thank you. And as someone who just came from a state broadband office, I can tell you they want to hear from you, right? They want to know you, they want to talk with you, they want to hear about your great work, and they want to tell others about that and advocate for you as well. Does anyone else on the panel have any advice for affiliates around how to work with state and local officials on this Treasury funds? Nope. Okay, well, we will move on to the infrastructure bill. the potential infrastructure bill, I should say. Okay, so let's talk about Biden's American Jobs Plan, also known as, or AKA, the infrastructure bill. There's a lot of moving parts with this, right? Things are changing daily. But Jenna, can you give us a brief overview of where things stand today, to your knowledge, what this bill or soon to be bill currently looks like, what it looks like in terms of funding for broadband and digital inclusion, and what we can expect to see happen as the bill works its way through the legislative process over the next few months?
Way to ask me an easy question. So I think the first thing that's helpful to know is that President Biden's infrastructure plan doesn't actually have a ton of details in it. So for the most part, what I'm going to be talking about is the House of Representatives infrastructure plan. President Biden's plan sort of, says that we should be deploying broadband at faster, future-proof speeds, and that we should be making sure that municipalities and other alternative providers can offer broadband so that we can bring down the price. But there isn't actually text, the details for the text of that plan. What everyone assumes his plan is essentially is Representative Clyburn and Senator Klobuchar's Accessible Affordable Internet for All Act, and that, or people might have heard the term Lift America Act. That's sort of a bigger infrastructure bill that includes these broadband provisions in it. So that bill has a whole lot of stuff in it. The first thing I think that's important to NDIA members is there's actually $6 billion so that we can keep funding the emergency broadband benefit for a little bit longer. You'll probably remember the original emergency broadband benefit was $3.2 billion. So this is almost, doubling, well, more than doubling. That's doubling the original amount. So that's going to be a huge influx of funds to help the program last longer. Also, it provides extra money for the Emergency Connectivity Fund, which is a fund that helps basically fund distance learning devices and hotspots for schools and students in their homes. There's also, a lot of you are probably familiar with the Digital Equity Act. And that bill gives money to states that they can use to, come up with plans for digital inclusion, do digital literacy training, give out devices, all of that amazing stuff that you guys work on. So that bill is essentially copy pasted word for word in this bill, in the infrastructure plan. And I believe it's $625 million for that. So those are some of the sort of key provisions. There's a whole bunch of other stuff. I believe there's around $80 billion to deploy broadband in areas that don't have it, and that's to deploy faster broadband. There's also provisions to help improve competition in the marketplace. So there's provisions that will make sure that people have access to broadband at speeds of 100. And if they don't, they might be able to get deployment funding. There's a lot of states right now don't allow municipalities to offer broadband. And so this bill would preempt some of those blocks or bans. There's provisions about school bus Wi-Fi. And then one thing that I think is also extremely important is right now the FC, the Federal Communications Commission, doesn't have a lot of money about the price of broadband. It's just not one of the things that they collect data on. If we don't know how much broadband costs, it's really hard to know more about our affordability problem and how to solve it. So this bill would also require the collection of that data, and then would encourage providers to make it public by creating, little scorecards essentially that say, here's how much this plan will cost, here's what you're actually getting. We're going to make it clear for you. And that's something that I think, all of us are in here probably broadband consumers, and I'm guessing we've all been very frustrated when trying to sign up for new service and not understanding how much it's actually going to cost after taxes and fees and what we're paying for. So there's a whole lot of things. In terms of, you wanted me to say what we expect. I think it's hard to say what's going to happen. As people probably see right now, President Biden is really eager to work across the aisle on an infrastructure plan. And for now, the the folks on Capitol Hill are deferring to President Biden on that. So what we're seeing right now is the Democrats and the Republicans trying to come to the negotiating table over an infrastructure package. And then, to do that, I think there's debates about how much money we want the overall package to be. The great side is that both the Democrats and the Republicans believe that broadband is counting as infrastructure. There's debates about, should we keep this? What is infrastructure? Both sides agree. Broadband is infrastructure, which I think is very clear. But debates on funding, if Congress isn't able to come to bipartisan agreement, then we're going to see the Democrats try to pass this on their own. However, typically you would need 60 votes in the Senate to do that. We don't have 60 Democrats, there's 51. And so there's a weird process called budget reconciliation that I'm not really going to dive into because it doesn't matter for our purposes, but basically it means that the Democrats can pass it without Republican support. However, everything sort of has to have a tie into budget, and you can't sort of get in a lot of, actual policy work. So the bill would have to be sort of stripped down to fit this procedural hill. So, we're hoping to see action on this. I'm fairly confident that we'll see something move in the next couple of months. Maybe I'm overly optimistic, but I think this is something that everyone wants to see.
Thank you, Jenna. I keep hearing July 4th, but we'll see. Francella?
One thing I want to add to the framing of this is that I feel like it's really easy sometimes when we're on these webinars for this to seem like this is someone else's issue. This is not a spectator sport. I think all the time about the fact that wherever you are in this ecosystem, you have power. And if that means that you need to get involved in this conversation, I think that it's important for us to understand the framing of this. If we say nothing, our money that's in public funds will continue to fund the system that has failed too many cities. It's failed too many communities. So either we say what's wrong and how to fix it, or we stay silent and let this be someone else's issue. And I think sometimes when I'm thinking about overall the impact, when we think about nationally, even if there's, the communities that are disconnected or far apart, there is an aggregate impact on all of us, whether it's workforce development, overall competitiveness, when we're thinking about which voices are going to get to shape our democracy, which populations are going to have access to either hourly jobs or high-skilled careers, making sure we're actually claiming that language. We have an opportunity to actually get involved, because when there are thousands of communities that are locked out of a digital society, there's an aggregate impact on us wherever we are. And then when we think about locally, this is something that for these communities that are essentially struggling, waiting, literally waving the flag saying, look at us, we need you. We need to actually be able to speak up and articulate what exactly does it mean to stay disconnected. For them, that means population lost. That means that people can't stay there and age in place. If they do get medical care, it's inferior medical care than people in metropolitan areas. When we think about their educational outcomes, when we think about their civic engagement, all of those things suffer. And I think a lot when I'm trying to maybe sometimes just make this real for, I think sometimes policymakers, and whether it's state or federal level, that might not have to go to the grocery store, or their kids aren't in the same high school, and so they don't have to be confronted with some of these issues in the same way that digital inclusion advocates are. I think about when they were deciding on which cities, when they were thinking about which cities the railroads are what made places like Chicago, St. Louis, Albany, New York. These are the places that came alive because
Is Francella frozen to everyone else? Okay.
She was on a roll.
She really was.
It was
Okay.
awesome.
Lack of broadband quality at its finest. We have to
Yes.
make this joke every time we talk about it.
And it happens every time, right? We illustrate our point. All right. Well, hopefully Francella will be able to rejoin us in a moment. But I think I'd like to sort of go on to how we can bring this home for our affiliates. So Yosef, now that we've kind of gone through all these federal opportunities, we'd love to hear from you and from your perspective. how can NDIA affiliates and the community members that they represent get involved, like Francella was just talking about? So how can they speak into the creation of these federal programs and statutes like the permanent broadband benefit or the infrastructure bill?
So Francella was on a roll and she was really speaking to this question. I'm going to try to pick up where Francella, can we turn it back to her because she was making great points. I want to.
Sorry about that, you guys. And I live in DC. I'm actually very connected, so I'm very sorry about that. But the point is, that was just the universe telling me to get off my soapbox about this. All I wanted to make sure is that people know that people in these like towns that are essentially just waiting for answers, it's our problem. This is something that every single one of us can actually be a part of the solution. This is not for someone else to work out in some state house or Washington, DC. We can all weigh in on this discussion.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, just picking up off of that, one of the things I want to emphasize that Francella mentioned is storytelling. A lot of times we in DC explain how broadband is essential for a variety of reasons, but it resonates a lot more when it's coming from households on the ground who can actually say, I don't have connectivity, so my child can't access online classes, or I can't go to work, or I can't get any medical care. And that really speaks to how members of Congress and other policymakers really think about these issues. And so when affiliates who are on the ground level, if you can start collecting stories about the lack of connectivity, but also about how certain things might be working. So we in DC could help push those policies forward. So we have this emergency broadband benefit program now. We need stories, stories about how the program is working, stories where we can improve the program in future iterations and help us move the ball forward. So I think storytelling, both in terms of the lack of connectivity and also what's working is critical. The second point I want to make here is advocacy in general. Again, Francella really hit the nail on the head here, but we all have a voice. We all have the ability to make change, whether that's through individual voices or a collective power. We at Common Cause, our grassroots organization, we do a lot of work in mobilizing groups to really make their voices heard in all types of policy spaces. So whether that's signing letters or taking action in some other way, we really want to make the issue clear that there's a significant amount of the country that wants significant infrastructure investments in broadband. The last point I'll make is that going back to storytelling, but also education, I think there is an understanding about access, the lack of access when it comes to broadband. And there's a growing understanding of how affordability is important. But the digital equity, digital inclusion part is where there needs to be a lot more education, in my opinion. We just had a hearing on broadband equity a few weeks ago, and though some in the hearing unfortunately advanced the false narrative that some people aren't adopting broadband because they don't care or it's irrelevant to them. It's a false narrative that's still perpetuating in this discussion, which is really unfortunate. So really unpacking that and helping lawmakers understand that it's not that people don't care or households think broadband is irrelevant to them, but looking deeper into why they aren't subscribing. Are they a marginalized community that doesn't trust companies, or they don't trust the government? Are they a non-English speaking individual that needs more language translations to really understand how the programs work and benefit them? How do we really get down to making sure these programs are accessible and broadband is accessible to all types of communities that don't necessarily fit the everyday mold that most folks in DC come to understand? So those are just a few ideas of how we can get engaged.
If I may add to Joseph and Francella's excellent points about engagement, I also think that the role of other stakeholders, like for example, the financial services industry, came out with a report on, basically what the prior presenter from Alliant was talking about, how banking is now all digital, talking about why people aren't banked, the non-banked population. And one of their recommendations was, broadband, affordable broadband, ubiquitous affordable broadband. So I think that we can and we should find these voices from other sectors, from the telemedicine world, from the financial services world, who can also reinforce, you know, these points that we're lifting up about affordable broadband, but also about the importance of digital navigators, you know, helping people use broadband to do these other sort of modern day equivalents of, you know, going to the teller and getting a withdrawal, right? You know, or sending money to somebody else, which we have apps, we have, you know, folks who do this differently now. So again, it's a more, we need to also sort of do that talent search and sort of scan the world we know, and to help those other stakeholders engage with us and stand with us as we make these fights, you know, in this next coming infrastructure legislative battle.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Well, thank you to all of you. It looks like we actually don't have many questions today. I think that's because you have all been so thorough, which this is a first that we don't have any questions. So I am going to just say thank you to all of our panelists for your time and expertise and for advocating for our affiliates and for your work in this field. It's wonderful to partner with you, and look forward to continuing to work with you in the future. So with that, Angela, I'm going to turn it back over to you.
That was awesome. Thank you all for being here, for sharing your expertise. NDIA relies upon all of you quite often, and you came through for us in the community again, so you're fabulous. For those who weren't able to join us, you can send them the link. Caitlin will get this posted tomorrow. Thank you all, and have a great Wednesday.